So in a stereotype, typical Eastern European scientists that you see in movies. We actually prefer to work with this type because we think they're coachable and we think there's a lot of value that they can provide.
Hello and welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast, where we interview business leaders and emerging market experts on business innovations, market opportunities, and macro-level trends in emerging and frontier market countries. Join us for the next hour to dive deep into the world of emerging markets as we speak with top performers who are successfully investing, working, and living in these markets themselves. Welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lal, and I am joined today by Pedja Predin. Pedja is Managing Director at Fifth Quarter Ventures. Pedja is an INSEAD 14J, and he is about as INSEAD as it gets. He has lived across 7 countries. He was on the Serbian National Water Polo team. And post-INSEAD, he joined Microsoft, then worked for a print-on-demand startup named Gelato. He helped scale it into a unicorn by leading its expansion into emerging market countries like India, China, South Africa, Russia, and the UAE. Ultimately, he returned to his home country of Serbia to launch one of the first VC firms solely focused on Southeastern Europe. And so I've got to say, you've really lived an extraordinary life, and any one of your accomplishments would definitely be considered exceptional by most people. So I was wondering if you thought at all about what influences or innate traits you might have. Are there any indications from a young age that you might accomplish these sort of things or live such an international lifestyle coming from Serbia?
Perfect. In terms of the story, I grew up in a pretty normal family. My parents were relatively successful in their own ways. My dad was actually kind of like a GM of a small food processing company, and my mom was an engineer. But in addition to that, my dad was also a water polo national team official, and water polo was pretty much part of my home since I was a little kid. And when I was 3 or 4 years old, I really didn't have a choice which sport to choose. So I was pretty much pushed that way. And for me, it's also a big part of my life today, just seeing kind of like how sport can really affect the future life decisions. I think that for me, starting to play at 4 years old, building kind of like this teamwork muscle and ability to work with different people and adapt to different cultural environments was a huge benefit that I was able to get at an early stage. And for me also, water polo was the main way how I ended up in the US and achieved a scholarship to play sports and also study for free, which at the time my parents really couldn't afford. So yeah, in a way, it really helped me come to where I am and played a big role. But I'm also super grateful for my parents for instilling the traditional family values inside myself at an early age.
For sure. I think that that's something that is really important for kids, and you can learn so much from athletics. And for a lot of people, it can be their sort of ladder up to life to do other things. So really interesting background. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you think athletic competition gives a person, though, because I've seen that you have really highlighted that background of your own. And even looking at your firm's deck, I saw that among your other partners, one of them was also an athlete. And then I think you were even saying that you prefer investors that have athletic backgrounds as well. So I was wondering what the reason for that is. Why do you think having an experience in athletics is so important for the people that you work with and want to work with?
I think that one of the important elements is taking this extra mile and really doing things when no one is watching you. So building that discipline is crucial. And I mean, sports is not the only way to do it, but definitely is a good way to get that, I would say, skill.
For sure.
And then, really having kind of like a vision and mission in life, which is not only monetary compensation, but really trying to build something big. And as an athlete, for me, kind of like winning the Olympic medal was always some big dream. And I see founders that think about kind of like building the company which is going to achieve the unicorn status as something very relevant or very similar. And I think that also our region is, Southeast Europe, where I'm from, is mostly known based on the great athletes that we have. Luka Modric in soccer from Croatia, Novak Djokovic in tennis, Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, and they were able to push themselves against the odds and really be successful, and not just for a short period, but really for a long period of life. So always having additional motivation to go to the next level. And that's why I think that mentality for the founders can be really crucial.
Definitely that part of the world is very impressive. I mean, I think if you look at the NBA for the last few decades, most of the top international players have come from Serbia or one of the neighboring countries. So clearly there's something that's going on there, whether it's the culture or discipline that's taught, that's led to a lot of world-class athletes.
And it's only 20 million people living here, right? I mean, if you think about kind of like the former Yugoslavia all the way from Slovenia to Macedonia, it's not a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely pretty amazing outside success there. And I definitely want to get more into Southeastern Europe and why you're investing in that region. But maybe going back to your personal story, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your own experience building that unicorn that we talked about a little bit, and why it was that you joined that company, what potential you saw in it, and what made you believe that you could help grow it into something larger. And also maybe why that emerging market strategy was essential to that growth.
Oh, great. If you're okay, maybe we take a step back and we'll discuss a bit the childhood. And then after that, I mentioned that I went to the US to study for college. And I did stay in New York for a few more years after college to work in an executive search and leadership consulting company. But then, same as you did, I went to INSEAD for an MBA in 2013. And for me, that was the next step in building the global career. An amazing experience, one of the best years that I had in my life. And during that year, I really decided I want to be in the technology sector and really focus on emerging markets in a way. So my first job was at Microsoft, where I was focused on the business management strategy for its operations across Central and Eastern Europe, which is pretty much, if you put the line on the map, everything which is east from Germany. So starting from the Baltics, Poland, all the way until Greece. And I stayed there about 2 years and realized that I want to be building stuff almost from scratch and make an impact in a way. So I was recruited by a company called Gelato, which is in print-on-demand space, which was something that I didn't know much about. And also, I thought that that was kind of like an old idea. I mean, what new can you do? But they really had a unique value proposition, and they still have, that you can upload different PDF or JPG file. They have a proprietary software which is going to prepare that file for printing, so doing all of the pre-press work, and then routing it to the closest professional print house, which is in their partner network, which is going to be closest to your end address. So pretty much you upload and you don't worry. It's going to be prepared for printing, it's going to be produced, and it's going to be shipped to the address wherever you want all across the world. So really the value was in this network. And Gelato has production partners in about 40 countries, and they're able to ship to 200 countries plus. And big part of my role was actually building that network. So I spent about 6 months in China. I set up partnerships in India, in South Africa, in Russia, in UAE. So in a way, all of the markets that no one else wanted to go. But for me, that was really a formative experience. So after INSEAD, getting this great responsibility and also be part of the company, which is growing. So when I joined Gelato, was, I would say, Series A startup. And now it's a unicorn backed by SoftBank, Goldman Sachs, and Insight Partners. So it was a great journey.
That's amazing. That must have been such an exciting experience. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you actually did that, going into places like India and China, bringing a new business in there. I mean, I assume that definitely wasn't easy. I would guess that you don't speak all of those different languages. So what was it actually like spreading the business on the ground there? What sort of research did you do ahead of time? How did you build relationships? I mean, I guess I would assume that there were already some business partners there that were doing the printing for you, but there's probably also a lot of market development going on and branding that needed to be done in these places. So how did you build relationships in these different places and overcome culture and language differences as you spread the business across all these really different countries?
No, I think it's a great question. And, from this perspective, I probably have one answer, but at the time I was thinking completely differently. I think that really INSEAD helped me a lot because my job was pretty much, we would decide which market to focus, and then I would fly in and try to build relationships. And INSEAD network in all of these places is quite strong. So you always have someone to call and ask for perspective, intro, some advice. So that was super helpful, especially when I went to China, when I went to Shanghai, where there is a huge alumni network and pretty much someone will know someone, and that can open up the doors. And I think that element that I probably took for granted at the beginning was the importance of building strong relationships, especially in the Eastern markets where if you come from the West, you're part of big, sexy startup, you need to treat them properly. I mean, they're going to look at you as someone who is an outsider, but there needs to be respect from both sides. And if that means going to a lot of dinners and spending a lot of time with them, meeting their families, you need to do it. And that's maybe something that in the Western world is not as common, but it really takes a lot of time to get to that stage and then make a deal that's going to work for both sides. And we also had situation, for example, in China where we would actually sign an agreement with the partner, but day after they would say, it doesn't mean anything. We're not going to do anything for you because we just don't trust you. But you did sign the agreement. Why did you do it? They said, just piece of paper. It's nothing else. So you need to overcome that. You need to actually hit your head against the wall a couple of times. In my case, maybe even more than that, to learn the local intricacies and nuances and be able to kind of like adequately respond and build that trust. But it was painful. I think it was a really amazing experience. There were a couple of times that I was super embarrassed that we were not able to achieve what I promised to the rest of the team. But at the end of the day, I think it actually provided a huge value to the company, and it meant that my work was successful.
For sure. It definitely seems that it was very successful. And not only the fact that you were able to do that in a country that wasn't your own, but doing that in multiple countries is incredibly impressive. I mean, places like India, China, not only are they quite different from Serbia, they're also quite different from each other. And without language skills or prior knowledge, I think that is really impressive, because I think anywhere in the world, business is about people and relationships. But I think in a lot of these emerging market countries, that's even more true than it might be in more developed countries, where it's more about just your credentials and what's on the contract. In a lot of these emerging market countries, it's a lot more about getting to know people, gaining their trust, because these are more trust-based economies. So super impressive that you were able to do that across multiple different countries, and agree that the INSEAD network is also very helpful. I have definitely learned that myself making this podcast. It's pretty amazing that almost every country has really high level people from the network you can reach out to. But moving on from that, at what point did you decide to leave Gelato and get into VC? If you could talk about the reasoning for that and why you saw VC as an opportunity, would love to learn more about that.
Well, from the moment I left Serbia, I was 19 years old, and I spent about 13 to 14 years abroad at that time. And there were some private reasons, but also on the other side, I saw the opportunity in the market where I'm from. I mean, generally, people tend to have strong STEM, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics backgrounds, which is important in the technology sector. And I saw the early companies coming out and building interesting stories. And I was thinking, perhaps my scaling experience from Gelato and everything that I did on the commercial side can be quite complementary to these technical founders. At the same time, since the INSEAD days, when I was part of the PE and VC club, I wanted to be on the investing side. So pretty much trying to get both those things in the equation. I actually started helping out an early stage startup in Serbia. They were going through the fundraise round, and I met probably one of the only VCs in the region, actually the first VC, South Central Ventures. And we liked each other, and they told me, why don't you come work for us? And that was the thing. So I started working for them in 2019 as an investment manager, and stayed about 2 years before deciding that together with my partner now, Tiho, we should do something else, and we should build a fund on our own.
Sure, that makes sense. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of raising the fund. What made you feel so strongly that it was the time to start a VC firm in Serbia and that you should be the one to run it? What was the value you saw? What was the pitch they made to investors? What did you tell them that made them comfortable thinking that this is a place we should invest and this is the person to do it with?
Well, I have to say that we came to an idea just before the markets collapsed and the war in Ukraine broke. So, we had interesting honeymoon, and then we got pretty depressed. But I think that we saw a couple of things happening, and that really drew our attention on why we should do it, right? So we saw a lot of the funds in a local market being more, in a way, bureaucratic or having more consulting and maybe finance backgrounds, well, less being on the go-to-market side and really trying operationally to support the founders. So that was one of the key reasons why we thought we should have a unique value proposition. But the pure process of doing the fundraise for the first time in this difficult market was not easy. And it also took us a bit of time to get all of the regulatory permits because we had to set up the management company and then alternative investment fund, which is regulated by the local SEC, Security Exchange Commission. And that took a bit of time. And then really what we are super proud of, that half of our investor base is foreign, coming from either US, Austria, Germany, Hong Kong. So we were able to get, a new money into Serbia, which came from more developed markets. And we're super proud of it. But doing not just the fundraise, but also the regulatory element and also the KYC with the banks, it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, sure. It definitely does sound like a very interesting experience. And I'm sure given that VC is brand new in the region as well, a lot of those regulations are probably new as well. So I'm sure that was not an easy process either.
Yeah, we're the first private fund, in a way, that is regulated by the local rules. So there were some funds that were set up by Luxembourg or Netherlands jurisdictions. So we're the only one here, and it's kind of like a lot of education that needs to take place.
Yeah, I'm sure there had to be education on all sides and lots of meetings with the government. And
yeah, I can only say that in the first meeting, one of the regulators, and I cannot say, of course, which one, asked us if we can provide net asset value calculations every day, by the end of the day, to them. So I'm still thinking how we could ask any startup to provide that, but that's kind of like the growing pain.
No, it's definitely not easy. So I respect you guys for being able to pull that off. When it comes to your pitch to the international investors, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. What was the potential that you sold them on that drew them in, made them believe in the region and the fact that it could be the next place where VC could really take off?
It's really kind of like the selling the region in a way. So especially it was obvious from the moment that everyone started working remotely, and then during COVID it exploded. So what we see from the madness is that you can really create global products while being located here in Southeast Europe. So the model is as follows in a way. You keep the product and development locally. We talked about kind of like the strong STEM education here. The costs are super low and there is good technical talent. While on the other side, you can keep the agile and sales and marketing team in global centers like New York, like London, like San Francisco, where the primary market is. And at that time, we saw the first unicorns coming out. In Croatia, we have Infobip, which is in kind of like the communication space. We have Rimac, which is making supercars, electric supercars. And then in Romania, there was UiPath, which was the biggest IPO in Europe. So that's really convincing people that actually it's possible to make that happen here. And it made our pitch a bit easier. And then we added the second element that we do play the role of operator turned VC. So we really try to help these technical founders get that second side of the brain, or we help them expand the team, or we help them on the go-to-market or on the fundraise, so they can have end-to-end capability to build a global success.
Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. I think that you have seen a lot of similar success stories in other small countries that internationalized over the past couple of decades, whether it was Israel or Estonia, I think Singapore also to some extent, but yeah, definitely a thesis that makes sense. And also over the past couple of decades, it has become quite common for US companies to outsource a lot of their technical work to Southeastern Europe. You might hear more about the Philippines or India or other Asian countries, but for a variety of reasons, I think a lot of companies actually prefer those Southeastern European technical talent. And if you can have that talent make money themselves, build companies in their own region, not have to immigrate to places like the UK, I think that that's a great thesis and it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, we also want to build IP here. That's the next level in the evolution. And also as a fund, we see ourselves trying to play the role that, for example, Index Ventures played in the UK a few decades ago, or Sequoia did in the Silicon Valley, or GGV did in China. So really trying to be that market maker and help the ecosystem get to the next level.
Sure. And when it comes to building IT, I've seen on your deck that there is a very large focus on AI. I was wondering, why is there that focus on AI, and why do you think that Southeastern Europe in particular is particularly well suited to build AI companies?
Well, I mean, it's 2024. So I think in our industry, if you're not talking about AI, you're probably not in the right business. That being said, however, there is a lot of noise. There are a lot of things that I think are not going to survive. They're not going to really be relevant in a couple of years. And there are a couple of areas where we actually think that local founders can be successful. So there are probably on one side areas which are more capital intensive, require a large number of people or a large cost on the servers, and I think that's where we can play the role. But there are elements of the AI infrastructure or development stack where we can find a global leader, which can be agile and nimble. It can come from here. And we believe in kind of like a strong technical talent, as I told you. And also universities are developing great IP. So the goal is really to leverage that and make something big. For example, we see a lot of dev tools coming out of Croatia in the past 2 years. And some of them are really playing the leading roles in their respective verticals.
It's amazing. I was wondering if you could give some examples of any companies that you are particularly excited about that are ones you've invested in, or just any that you've seen in the region that are in that bleeding edge space that makes you so excited.
Yeah, we like the companies that have some roots here, but already are global. So we also are betting on the diaspora angle, where people like me or similar maybe went abroad, got their degrees, or went to work in Facebook or Google or similar companies, and then decide to come back. So one of the examples is a company called Thales, which is in the semiconductor space. It has a very unique proposition focused on the LLMs. And the founders are from Bosnia, Montenegro, and Serbia. It's a diverse team, and they all worked together for a long time. They worked together at AMD before, at NVIDIA. Then they set up a company called TensorRent, which is now a unicorn. And this is their latest venture. And we think that's potentially one of the companies that can be a global winner and has strong local roots.
Sure, yeah, and I had a quick look at Thales when I was going through your portfolio companies, and that was one that really stood out to me because, as we were saying, AI is definitely all the rage right now. But what is the big issue is that it is so energy intensive, and we really need to solve that. And I think Thales' solution is one that's really interesting. Basically, what they're doing is they're taking these deep learning models and inputting them into silicon, into hardware, basically, rather than the software that they currently are. And that way, one of these chips that you put into your phone or your laptop, that'll end up being more efficient than a whole data center full of GPUs. And so the claim is it's 1,000 times more efficient than things are currently. And so I think that is really exciting. If it takes off, I think the return will probably be exceptional. So really excited to see where that goes, because I think it is so needed for our future if we are going to pursue this AI path.
Well, we're in the game of financing risk. So I have my own hypothesis, but there are some things that need to happen in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely something to keep our eyes on. So in our private conversations, you mentioned that part of what drew you back to Southeastern Europe is that you wanted to make social impact and you believed that VC was a way to do that. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on why you think that startups and VC are so important to these countries and why they can drive social impact in that part of the world.
Yeah, I think that it's important to say that there are a couple of things. I mean, as a venture capital investor, in addition to kind of like focusing on really returning the money to my LPs, we think that it's really helping the ecosystem in a way that it's providing global opportunities in terms of job being created this way. We're also bringing global technologies home and getting them adopted in a faster way than they were before. So we think that local economies can really leapfrog when it comes to specific segments, such as AI that we spoke about a bit earlier. And what we ultimately are about is providing a much, much needed social mobility tool. So trying to create, as we call them, the first flywheel effects in our respective countries. So we want to see people getting great jobs, buying their first house, then the second house, then a great car, being able to travel around the world. And all of these things that we take for granted if we went to INSEAD, but for a lot of people that grew up here and didn't have these opportunities, it's really life-changing. And we think that this way we can have the new generation of entrepreneurs that's going to even be more successful. As you know, we were for a long time a communist or let's say socialist country where you didn't have private enterprises until the late 80s. So it's actually kind of like the generation ago. So it's still early innings, and that's why we see the big social impact here.
For sure. I think it's a huge opportunity not only to provide jobs that pay more than people would have been able to make in the past, but also actually to keep them at home so they don't have to go somewhere else to make that same kind of money that they are capable of making. So I think that in itself is a huge impact. I was wondering if you could share any advice that you have for startup entrepreneurs in emerging markets, particularly places like Southeastern Europe, who might be interested in raising VC funding. Where should they start? What would you be looking at as an investor? What are some things that they should do before they come to you for that investment?
So I'll probably gonna focus more on Eastern European founders here. And I think that this advice would be a bit more relevant to them, but maybe in some other regions, it's going to be a similar story. But if you think about the stereotypes of founder profiles, you see two types here in Eastern Europe. So one, A, are the hustlers that are maybe stronger on the business side, but they really are about trying to make a good deal for themselves personally. And two, B, so the second type is technical founders. So traditionally very introverted, most often, really lacking business skills. So in a stereotype, typical Eastern European scientists that you see in movies. So we actually prefer to work with this type because we think they're coachable and we think there's a lot of value that they can provide. So in a way, there may be some similarities to A16Z strategy, but more focused on Eastern Europe. So what is our advice to them is they need to focus on their strengths. They really shouldn't focus too much attention on, raising too intensely and trying to impress some people. They should be themselves. So do what's the best, play it naturally. Don't try to pretend to something that you're not. Just be who you are. The right person will come in. The right investor will be there. It might not be us, but someone's going to be there. And they'll help them get where they need to be much faster. So that's the advice. Just play it naturally, use your strengths, and good things will happen.
Yeah, that's really good advice, and it reflects the strengths of the region. And I think it is also reflected in your investment strategy. Most of your portfolio companies are very product driven. And I think that does make sense given that the sales teams may be in the US, but the product is based where you were based. And so that the people who are leading the companies should probably be there and be focused on that as well. Well, I think that covers all the questions that I had on my side. I was wondering if there are any other thoughts that you might want to share or anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about.
No, Nick, thank you for hosting me. And I think that you're doing a great job. I think we need to have more interesting stories from the emerging markets. I do hope there's going to be more stories from Eastern Europe, maybe some of these technical founders that we spoke about. But my pleasure to be here and also looking forward to your next step.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn.